Wednesday is here, the season just around the corner, and honestly, it feels like we're in a position where we don't have enough time to talk about all the things I want to talk about. So today, we have got a lot to dive into. Before we do, as always, y'all know the drill. If you enjoy all this, hop in the chat, get active. We love having you in the chat. We love the interaction. On top of that, hit the like button. And as a bit of news and a bit of housekeeping before we continue, one thing I'd like to say is keep your eyes on homefield.com because over the next few days, you're going to have exclusive releases coming through Homefield that you do not want to miss. For example, the Crimson Tide will have their drop Sunday, August 27th, and you can get 15% off any order from Homefield using code ATTS15. Once again, 15% off any order from Homefield using code ATTS15. Thank you so much to Homefield for working with the channel. All that being said, where do we begin? Because there are so many different things for us to cover, but I think the best way for us to do this is to start today where we left off on Monday, and that's talking about some true freshmen around the nation you have got to know, especially because of some of the news that has just come out, especially at a school in Arizona State, where Jaden Rashada was named the starting quarterback. Now, we're going to double back and talk about this because this is a scenario that we could dive deeper into. But just know, as we sit here right now, that Jaden Rashada is a name to know whenever we're talking about the true freshman watch list. Remember, on Monday, I gave you names such as Malik Muhammad, Anthony Hill, both at the Texas Longhorns, Zachariah Branch with USC. I gave you Peyton Bowen, and I gave you Caleb Downs at the safety position. Plus, on top of that, Caden Proctor. And now we're turning our attention to some quarterbacks. Jaden Rashada is a name to know, but he's not the only quarterback I would be keeping up with. Another name I think you need to know is Austin Mack out there at Washington. Now, the reason why we're not going to spend a long time talking about Austin Mack is because they have Michael Penix Jr. Michael Penix Jr. last year, I think, was one of the most underappreciated college football players in the nation. You go check out his stats. They were otherworldly. You go watch a Washington game, come back to me and tell me you didn't have a blast watching Michael Penix Jr. play football. I'm issuing that challenge to anybody because personally, that was my kind of guilty team that I would watch last year was Washington and Michael Penix Jr. They were my guilty pleasure. Whenever the night would end and if I would be rewatching games that maybe I'd missed during the day because trying to keep up with all of them is a lot, the first game I'd always start rewatching was Washington because of Penix Jr. But now we're in a situation where they have got a true freshman quarterback that they love in Austin Mack. Is he going to see the field? No, probably not. In a perfect world, he won't his true freshman year. In a perfect world, he gets to sit back, learn from Michael Penix Jr. Michael Penix Jr. gets to go out there, have a continuation of the year he had last year. And by the way, if he does that, how he won't end up in New York, I am not sure, because if he repeats what he did last year, he absolutely needs to be in New York, in my opinion. But at the same time, guys, for them to have a quarterback that they like this much in Austin Mack, I think that's fantastic because it's never too early to start turning your attention to the future. Austin Mack could be the future. But now, like I said earlier, we need to double back to Jaden Rashada because Jaden Rashada is a name that if you keep up with recruiting, you probably know. Jaden Rashada is a name that if you're a Florida Gators fan, unfortunately, you definitely know. And in order for us to understand why this is so intriguing to me, we need to first have full context. If we go back, Jaden Rashada was at one point committed to the Florida Gators, and he was set to receive a very healthy NIL package. However, through whatever situation, everything fell through. Jaden Rashada decommitted from Florida and ended up at Arizona State. Now, I talked to High Top Sports and Cody the Professor, both great Florida content creators here on the platform. Would recommend both of their content. Absolutely. High Top, one of the best in the business. Cody on the come up, both worth your time. But one of the interesting things when we were having that conversation about the implications of the Jaden Rashada situation is I pointed out to them whether the Florida NIL collective was at fault or not is really irrelevant. I mean, it is relevant at some point, but in the court of public opinion, it's irrelevant. If people think that your NIL collective is hard to work with, that's a stigma you have to overcome. Now, luckily for Billy Napier and the Florida Gators, it looks like they've overcame it. They're recruiting at a really high level right now. They have DJ Lagway in the class, a 5-star quarterback from the state of Texas, someone that they're very high on. they're a team to watch on the recruiting trail right now. And in turn, they're a team to watch to see what Billy Napier is able to do in year 2. But the reason why I give you this full context is not to try and throw dirt on Florida. I think it's actually really impressive how they overcame the Jaden Rashada situation. I think if we're going to talk about the Jaden Rashada situation and talk about the nuance, we also must in turn talk about, hey, for that to be a situation that could have been really damaging, it turned out fairly well for the Florida Gators. But now we need to talk about the reality of this situation. Because with Jaden Rashada being named the starting quarterback at Arizona State, it creates an interesting conversation, and it will inevitably create an interesting comparison that whether or not I do it or another content creator does it, someone in the media will inevitably do the comparison of how Jaden Rashada fares at Arizona State compared to how Mertz fares at Florida. And if Mertz is pedestrian and Jaden Rashada goes out there and looks the part, looks like the quarterback that Florida hoped he was, looks like the quarterback Arizona State hoped he was, we're going to be on some very interesting conversations going forward. Now, I always need to preface this, and in the interest of fairness, once again, turn your attention to DJ Lagway. If DJ Lagway wasn't in the equation, this conversation would be 10 times more interesting, but Florida was able to mitigate that loss. They were able to get in a DJ Lagway who's committed to the class and who has been a sensational recruiter for the Florida Gators. But in my opinion, that's not going to satiate the national media's need to make this comparison between how Jaden Rashada will fare his freshman year as compared to how Mertz will fare with Florida. Because if Mertz struggles, if Florida's offense spurts in the passing game, because I'm really excited for their rushing attack. I'm going to level with y'all right now. I'm very excited for the Florida Gators rushing attack. I think they have some really talented running backs that are going to put college football on notice. I think they have a lot of ability. My biggest question is, are you going to be a balanced offense? And we're not going to know until the season gets here. But if Mertz struggles, if the Florida passing game struggles, and we take a look and Arizona State, Kenny Dillingham and Jaden Rashada, they're slinging it all over the yard, getting the ball moved around, that conversation will arise. Whether they have DJ Lagway in the class or not, it won't matter because DJ Lagway is still playing high school football and Jaden Rashada is an individual who could affect change now for the Florida Gators. So this is a situation we have to keep up with. Am I saying that it's the end of the world for the Florida Gators that they didn't get Jaden Rashada? Absolutely not. Not my contention in the least. My contention is there will inevitably be interesting comparisons made between Jaden Rashada and how he does at Arizona State compared to Mertz and his situation with Florida because of the Jaden Rashada to Florida situation. And we need to be cognizant of those comparisons because I think they're going to come and come quickly. Arizona State's also a team that I've talked about at length here on this channel that I am really excited for. You get Kenny Dillingham coming as the head coach, just served as Oregon's offensive coordinator, and Oregon's offense last year, I think, blew everybody in college football away. More specifically, the performance of Bo Nix last year blew everybody away. Because for my SEC and Alabama fans in the chat, Van Lucian, very happy you're here. I'll hit the comments right here in a little bit. You can attest to this. Bo Nix was a player that would show you for a drive, for a sequence, for a series, hey, he's got ability, but consistency was always the biggest crux. He goes to Oregon and he looks like a totally different quarterback, which is really one of the things I always talk about, that the transfer portal can be a beneficial change of scenery for all parties involved. Just because a player hits the transfer portal does not mean that player's a bust, does not mean that player isn't going to go to their new team and impact absolutely game-changing ability. It just means that sometimes the change of scenery is necessary, and we can point to several individuals who benefited from this, from Joe Burrow to Jamison Williams. We can go through a long list of guys that transferred and did better at their other locations. So this is going to be something we have to watch. Kenny Dillingham did a great job out there last year with the Oregon Ducks, and now he gets his own team. He gets Arizona State, and he gets a true freshman quarterback. You can sign me up. I'm very, very interested in how this situation is going to go down. I think there will be inevitable comparisons, and now we almost need to turn our attention to Florida. Because the interesting thing about the Florida Gators is how all of this came to be. We're talking about a situation where Florida and Billy Napier almost had to totally reshuffle the team, not in year one, like we see so many other coaches do, but going into year two. So what happens with the Florida Gators this year? I can't wait to see. Florida with Utah is a game that whenever that comes about, we are going to be talking about that nonstop. Let's hit some comments before we continue on. Van, Lucian, happy you're in here. Multitasking at work. Never got any of your social. Thanks, some people are behind us and starting a show. Yeah, y'all two definitely need to start a show. That'd be fun. He's facing elite D-line either. No, he's not. He isn't. But I also think that the change in offensive formula was much better for Bo Nix. But fair point, Lucian. He's not facing the same caliber defensive lines that he was facing in the SEC. Man, he just needs. Yeah, look, I love Napier. I hope they give him that time. But the way that we've seen the Florida Gators situation go down is going to be interesting to see what they do. Because typically when we see these coaches take over a program, I mean, we can point to several different examples around the nation. You'll see that instant, I'm getting into the room and I'm imparting my change right now. I'm stripping this down to bare bones right now and then moving forward. We're almost seeing that in year 2 with Billy Napier, which I don't think is the wrong way to go about it. I don't think we have enough data to really say what's the right way or the wrong way to go about it, especially with the existence of the transfer portal in its current capacity. I think that changes everything in college football, especially from a team building perspective, which in turn changes the conversations we would have to have around the expectations year 1 with coaches relative to year 2 and by extension year 3. But I completely agree with this right here. 3 seasons, I think, is a must. I think if you hire a new coach, you need to give him 3 to 4 seasons to impart his change. And I'm not saying he needs 3 to 4 seasons to win 10 games, but can you see an improvement? Do you watch your team by year 4 and say to yourself, okay, relative to where we were 3 years ago, we're in a much better place and I can see us moving forward linearly? If the answer is yes, we're all good, but completely agree there. In the top 4 on that side. Very true. And I'd say he might have more offensive talent in the side. Speaking of Bo Nix. Yeah. Also, some changing in coaching would help that dynamic. Yeah, look, I think that Florida's really interesting. Because they have some really solid coaches. They've made some really solid moves. Last year, the offense ran through largely Anthony Richardson, but at the same time, can you fault the Florida coaching staff for doing that? We can say maybe they should have had a little bit more consistency, this, that, and the other. But when you have a player that is as gifted as Anthony Richardson, it's kind of tough not to just say, hey, go do it. And Lucian, I think a great example of this is something we can relate to being, the teams we root for. It's almost like Bryce Young with Alabama, where Bama's offense ran almost singularly through Bryce Young last year. And was that the best way to do it? No, probably not. But at the same time, it was Bryce, right? So it's almost one of those things where you're the exception, not the rule. Anthony Richardson was a little bit like that in terms of the athletic ability he possessed. He was a little bit of the exception as opposed to the rule. But I think you make a really interesting point, or at least the point you're making bleeds into a really interesting conversation about how with Anthony Richardson not being there, they really got to get form offense going, which they absolutely tried to do last year. But once again, when you have a player that transcendent, that athletic, if they start doing their own thing and they go off script, you just kind of throw your hands in the air and you're like, yeah, do what you do. You're a freak, right? It's like with Bryce, when everything's went off script, we would throw our hands in the air and say, yeah, do what you do, because you're an absolute magician. Now, both Florida and Alabama, just because we got into that side of the conversation, they're going to have to rely on scheme as opposed to an absolute freak to get the job done. In a lot of ways, I think that can be more conducive to success. Now, understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying that Florida's offense nor Bama's offense is better without the caliber of player of Anthony Richardson or a Bryce Young. My contention is that in the absence of both of those individuals, the offensive scheme has to be that much more prevalent, which means you're relying on technique, you're relying on scheme, which when we're talking about a game where there's 11 individuals on the field, I think that might be more consistent and conducive to success. So just something to think about. But your point bleeds us into really interesting conversations, Lucian, and I love that so much. But let's talk about some biggest questions in college football, right? Because this, oh my goodness, where do we begin? I think if and I'm interested in hearing from y'all in the chat, but if I'm starting with my biggest questions in college football, one stands above the rest. And I don't mean this as a negative. It's just whenever we talk about the weight this brand carries, whenever we talk about the coaches involved, and whenever we talk about the past 2 seasons, inevitably this brand is one of the most talked about brands in college football. And of course, we're talking about Texas A&M. Jimbo Fisher, Bobby Petrino, Texas A&M. That is where we're going to start off for my biggest questions around college football. Will Texas A&M's offense get it right with Bobby Petrino as offensive coordinator? And I think by extension, the next question we have to ask is, will this be Petrino's offense or will it be Jimbo Fisher's? And even maybe more importantly, will it matter? First and foremost, I think that a new offensive coordinator in there was mandatory. We talk about this all the time. Jimbo has had success as a head coach, but there comes a certain point where if your calling card is the offensive side of the football, you better be able to put together some decent offenses. And for years, it seemed like the thing that teams feared the most about A&M wasn't their offense. It was their defense. The offense would be all over the place, but the defense was the beacon of consistency that team so desperately needed. Now, it's not problematic if you're an offensive head coach and the defense is the best part of your football team. I don't think that that's a problem. Look, we can point back to a few years ago with Alabama where they had a top 10 defense and the number 1 offense in the nation. Nick Saban's one of the most brilliant defensive minds in the nation, but the offense statistically was better. That's not a problem because your defense is still a top 10 defense in the nation. And sometimes with super explosive offense, you score so quickly that your defense is on the field more, giving them more opportunity to give up points. So it's not a totally analogous comparison. But you get the logic I'm putting forward. It's not an issue if you're a defensive-minded head coach. You have the number 1 offense in the nation and a top 10 defense. Nobody's going to complain because both sides of the ball are among the best in the nation. But if you're an offensive head coach and you have a top 25 defense and your offense is just shy of number 100 out of number 131, that's not good. That's not good. That's not at all the same situation as being a defensive-minded head coach or an offensive-minded head coach and fielding a top 10 unit in your area of expertise, but the other unit, the offensive or defensive unit, that's a top 5 unit. At least in that situation, both units are among the best in the nation, and we can excuse a margin of error because it's football. Maybe you recruited some stellar talent on the offensive side that are making your offense click in a manner that why would I want it to do anything else? Sure, the offense will be better than the defense this next few years because we just got some major wins, or vice versa. But when we see a disparity that large between where your offense sits and where's your defense and your calling card is offense, it is problematic. It does create questions. And I understand, in the interest of fairness, as I always try and be fair on this show, A&M has had a lot of unfortunate circumstances arise, whether it be due to injuries. It has just been a wild ride if you're a Texas A&M fan. But to quote Bear Bryant, one of the things that gets you a national championship is a little bit of luck. There's never been a national championship team that didn't have a little bit of luck on their side. You want to know why? Because football is a physical game. If you make it to the national championship and your best players are healthy, you had a little bit of luck. And I'm not saying that there wasn't great workouts that went into that, great support staff, great health trainers, great nutritional staff that allowed the players to maintain a level of health. But inevitably, all that goes out the window when we get onto the gridiron and you have 6'3" individuals weighing 215 pounds running 22 miles an hour, throwing their bodies at each other. All the nutrition, all that goes out the window, and then we're playing the game of football. So A&M has been unlucky. I will grant you that if you're an A&M fan watching this. I will grant you that. I will meet you somewhere along the line in this conversation. But I also think it makes complete sense why Texas A&M brought in a Bobby Petrino. You don't bring in an offensive coordinator and an offensive mind of that caliber without recognizing we have an issue. We have an issue here. The offense isn't clicking. And what's more problematic than that, ladies and gentlemen, if you asked me right now who has the best wide receiving core in the SEC, from a talent perspective, it'd be really hard for me not to say Texas A&M. it'd be really hard for me not to say Texas A&M. Now, I'd get a lot of pushback for saying A&M because the production has not been there, because we have seen an offense not be able to get together from any consistent standpoint. But let's walk through the talent of this Texas A&M wide receiving core now. You're talking about Evan Stewart, former 5-star number 1 wide receiver in the nation. You're talking Moose Muhammad, who comes from a football lineage. His father was coached by Nick Saban at Michigan State, Muhsin Muhammad, and then he went to play a long time in the NFL. NFL family, football lineage, kid was sensational last year. He was spectacular. He was awesome last year. And then you have Aniyah Smith coming back. No, super unfortunate that Green, their tight end, sustained an injury. Thoughts and prayers are with him. Hopefully he gets healed up. Hopefully he gets back to the football field better than ever. But we also need to understand they have some guys that are unknown in that tight end room that they're very excited about. They have a guy they got from PPI Recruits headed by Brandon Collier. Anytime I get an opportunity to talk about PPI Recruits, I'm going to talk about PPI Recruits. One of the most fascinating things in the game. Brandon Collier, absolutely worth your follow. An individual who goes across the world finding guys that can play college football. He brings them to America, and guess what? They go play college football. Alabama has a kid right now in their recruiting class from PPI Recruits, Justin Okoronkwo. Ohio State has a cat on their defensive line from PPI Recruits. Alabama was after him as well. Hero Canoe played 3 games in California. 3 games in California and had 36 Division I offers off of 3 games in his junior year. He played 2 years of high school football here, really 1.5 because he came in during the modified COVID season. Top 200 player in the nation. So super, super cool stuff happening from PPI Recruits. Well, Texas A&M has got a tight end. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce the name because I don't want to do that to him. I'm going to butcher it, and he doesn't deserve that. But his first name is Theodore. I believe his last name is Ostrom. Watch out for him because he's green, he's raw, but the dude has got a lot of ability. He has got a lot of talent. I bring all this to your attention to say my biggest question has got to be revolving around the offense with Texas A&M. They have got some serious playmakers on this offense. They lose A-Chain, someone who I thought was the catalyst of that football team, truly. If you go back last year, that offense didn't go anywhere that A-Chain didn't take them. They lose him. How do you mitigate that loss? Well, you get Reuben Owens, 5-star running back, really talented guy that has a lot of versatility to his game. He can get active in the passing game. He can get active as a running back. A&M is in a position where this offense this year, the results of this team, it's going to say a lot about what happens in the future. Will Jimbo be the head coach in the future for Texas A&M? And a lot of that depends on this year. Now, I've said this before. I don't think that Jimbo will be fired after this year, barring a complete meltdown because of the money they have to pay him. I mean, Jimmy Sexton deserves all the praise in the world for what he did for that contract. But that seat could certainly heat up. And I think it's a little bit warm already, which is why you get Bobby Petrino, a former head coach, to come in there as your offensive coordinator. Because if things don't go right, you have a backup plan. Now, I don't think that that's on the table this offseason. Like I said, I think that the Texas A&M season would have to be a complete derailment. But at the same time, it is something we need to see. Jimbo's getting paid Nick Saban, Kirby Smart money, and you're not getting Nick Saban, Kirby Smart results. You're not even getting Dabo results. But that's what he's getting paid. And at a certain point, you've got to give us the results for what we're paying you for. So that's my first question in college football. Texas A&M's offense, because they have the players, they've got a lot of ability. They've got a 5-star quarterback in Connor Weigman, who I actually really like. I think he's got a lot of ability, but once again, I think it's super unfair for us to say anything about his ability because, 1, he was a true freshman last year. 2, he was involved in an offense that was as chaotic as any offense in the nation. He was involved with a team that was as chaotic as any team in the nation. And that's one of the reasons why I'm still so high on that wide receiver room, because the guys that are there, they were a part of a process last year that was as chaotic as any in the nation, and still your guys like Evan Stewart, Moose Muhammad, they still manage to shine. If you can shine through all of that darkness, what happens when we start bringing some light in? That's my biggest question. So I think A&M is a team, guys, whether you believe in them or not, you have got to watch them because they have got so much talent on both sides of the ball. Defensive line, look, they may have lost an Anthony Lucas, who is a former top 100 recruit on his way to USC, big win for them. They may have lost a guy here or there. They are still jam-packed with five-star defensive line talent. I mean, jam-packed with five-star defensive line talent. What this team looks like this year is going to be very telling. I personally can't wait. Texas A&M, a team that we all have got to watch. My next question for college football this year. Does Michigan three-peat, beating Ohio State? And as we sit here right now, it's tough for me to say the answer isn't yes. Michigan beats Ohio State for a third time in a row. And let's unpack this for a little bit. Because whenever we're talking about teams around college football, your traditional powers during the college football playoff era. So we're talking Alabama. We're talking Clemson. We're talking Ohio State. The teams that have been there a lot. Heck, I think at this point we can even include Georgia. They have three college football playoff appearances. I'm sorry. And they've won it back-to-back. So I think we can even include Georgia at this point. If we look around, a lot of those teams are replacing quarterbacks, including Ohio State, where they are replacing C.J. Stroud. Now, they've got some talent in the room. Devin Brown is someone who, coming out of high school, I don't know if y'all remember, I implored anybody to go check out his stuff. I thought he was a very, very gifted player, a player that everybody needed to be aware of. I thought he was going to turn heads. Well, he's doing just that. Ohio State has got a phenomenally gifted wide receiving core. Love their running back room. But my big question for Ohio State this year is, one, what does your offense look like absent C.J. Stroud? Yes, I like your quarterbacks you have, but I still think it's a fair question if people are asking it of Alabama. And if it's a fair question about Alabama, then I think it's a fair question to ask of Ohio State. You had a first-round quarterback leave. What does your offense look like now? But mainly for Ohio State, what is your defense going to look like? You made a new hire last year, getting Oklahoma State's old defensive coordinator, and he had a very, very efficient defense with the Pokes. I mean, one of the better defenses in college football, if we were looking from an efficiency rating standpoint, when he was with Oklahoma State. Now, that defense was up and down last year. They certainly had their moments that left Ohio State fans wanting more, but at the same time, that was his first year there. He still needs to get in the players to run his scheme, get everything acclimated to the way he wants. This is year two now. He's going to be a little bit deeper into this. And we can't pretend like that Ohio State defense doesn't have the names on it. They have a JT Tuimoloau. They have a Jack Sawyer. So they have some names along that defensive line and in that defense that Ohio State fans are really high on. But is it going to be enough to dethrone Michigan? And as we sit here and talk before a game is played, my answer to you is no. I don't believe it is. I just don't think it is. And the reason is simple. Because when I look at Michigan, they return so much. They return everything. Yes, they have to replace some pieces along the offensive line, but Sharon Moore has more than earned the benefit of the doubt. Putting together the offensive lines he's put together, the recruiting he's done on the trail, he has entered a select group of offensive line coaches that even if you have some questions as to who is going to be the guy this year, who are going to be the names, you don't worry too much about it because who your offensive line coach is. In the case of Michigan, it's Sharon Moore. We look at the running back room. I don't think I need to say anything about their running back room. I don't think I need to utter a word about what they have there. If you're a college football fan and you're not aware of what Michigan has in their running back room, go watch. They've got it. The quarterback is where I have so much excitement for the Wolverines. Because if J.J. McCarthy and the Wolverines offense unlock the explosive passing game, this offense will unlock a new level that they did not have last year. And I don't think that that's too much to ask for Michigan. I think right now, the one thing that would take Michigan to the next level is a bit more of a balanced offense. Now, they have a very efficient offense. They have a very good offense. J.J. McCarthy's a solid quarterback. But what I mean is passes 20 yards plus down the field. If Michigan can start hitting those at a higher percentage, that offense will unlock a new capability that they otherwise did not have. Because now I want you to imagine you're the opposing defensive coordinator. What do? When you look across, you have Michigan, a former 5-star quarterback that's slinging the ball 30 yards downfield on go routes, beating you over top. And then they have Blake Corum chopping the ball away at will. The offense for Michigan has the ability to be really solid, even if they don't develop the downfield passing game, because they got to the college football playoffs last year. And one of the biggest things you kept hearing in games that Harbaugh would be like, hey, love what we have, but if we could unlock one thing, it'd be explosive passing, 20 yards downfield or more. That's the one thing our offense, if we could unlock it, we'd be dangerous. And I agree. If Michigan is able to get that facet of their game down, and heck, even if they're able to get more consistency in the intermediate to mid long range passing game, 15 to 20 yards, they're going to be a very tough offense to stop because of balance. And this takes me back to something we talked about last year. Why was Georgia so tough to stop? Well, there's multiple different reasons, but one reason I'm always going to point you towards was the balance that the Georgia Bulldogs had. The balance that the Georgia Bulldogs had made defenses really have to pick and choose. Because if you shut down their rushing attack, Stetson Bennett was a veteran presence in that offense, and he would just start wheeling and dealing. He would get it to his tight ends. If you were able to mitigate the tight ends, they just run it down your throat. If you have the ability to have an offense that is efficient at every level of offense, you can be dangerous. I don't need you to be otherworldly at any of those areas. Be efficient in all of them, and you're going to put the defense in a blender because everything is available. Every single facet of the offense is available and ready to go. And as a defense, if you have to stop those two running backs from Michigan and you have to worry about them hitting a downfield pass, that's putting your safeties in a really bad position. So my second question for college football, will Michigan go 3 in a row against Ohio State? I think the answer is yes. I think they will. I just think they return too much talent. I think there are too few questions for Michigan. And I believe that the questions we do have for Michigan, my question then becomes, does Ohio State have the answer to be able to solve those questions? I don't know yet, because my biggest questions for Michigan would revolve around the offense and trying to get them in a position where you make them one-dimensional, make them a run-only team, which is still very difficult to solve when you have that offensive line, when you have those running backs, still a challenge. But if you can get them into a one-dimensional team, you're having them play into your game. If they develop that passing game, it's going to be a lot of fun. So Michigan, a team to watch, and especially with the self-imposed 3-game punishment Jim Harbaugh has placed himself under, that's going to be something we have to watch, because let's be honest here, it's going to be interesting to see what the NCAA says about that. The NCAA kind of in an interesting position, because I don't think they hold the power they think they hold, but that's neither here nor there. Next question for me going into this college football season revolves around the Oklahoma Sooners. How much of a jump does Oklahoma make in year 2? Because let's be very honest with each other here. It was very impressive what Brent Venables did whenever he inherited the Oklahoma Sooners program from a recruiting standpoint. He instantly got the Sooners a top 10 recruiting class, and this is after there was a wave of decommitments in that recruiting class. He was able to patch it together, get a top 10 recruiting class, and get that moving. On top of that, he had a top 10 transfer portal acquisition class. He was able to get that, get them in, get it moving. Now, the results on the field weren't what Oklahoma fans were hoping nor expecting, but it was still an interesting season when we look at how many of those losses came down to one-possession games. Some of those losses came when you didn't have your starting quarterback and your second-string quarterback. Let's be honest here, you'd have been better off having your tight end do the Wildcat the entire time, because that was essentially what the offense was. What jump does Oklahoma make from year 1 to year 2? Well, there's an interesting point that I think we haven't talked about enough, and that's Brent Venables' use of the transfer portal in year 2. And the reason why I bring that to your attention, and especially in terms of what he was able to bring in transfer portal and recruiting, the reason why I bring that to your attention is because in year 2, Brent had an understanding of the needs he needed to get in the portal. He had a better understanding of the areas he needed to help fix Oklahoma in order for them to be the defense he wanted to create there. Year one, he was walking into the situation blind. Yes, he had tape. Everybody has tape. He can watch it. He can watch practices. But until the bullets start flying, there's no way to know what you really have. You can go against your own guys in scrimmage and you can look fantastic, but that's not the same. It's just not. And it's not just coming from me. Ask any college football coach out there. They will echo this same sentiment. So in year two, in both recruiting and in the transfer portal, Brent Venables has a higher understanding of the needs present and how to address those needs. What does that look like in terms of cause and effect? We know the cause. He knew the needs after having coached there for a year, after having been up close and personal for a year. That's the cause. The effect, going out to the transfer portal, what does that mean? We're going to see. Because the Oklahoma defense, I think, is the area of that team where all the fans are watching. Oklahoma's offense last year was actually not a bad unit by any stretch of the imagination. Can we ask for more consistency out of the Oklahoma offense? I think that's fair. I think Oklahoma fans that are super high on the offense would even meet me halfway there and say, okay, that's a fair analysis. More extended drives, being able to control the game at will instead of quick drives, quick scores. Especially when you have a defense that's trying to find their footing. Is an offense, you want to give them as much help as possible. Oklahoma had the ability to score at the drop of a hat, but that's a double-edged sword. Because if you have the ability to score at the drop of the hat, so too do you have the ability to walk off the field in the drop of the hat, putting your defense right back on the field. So it was a little bit of a double-edged sword. So maybe the thing we can ask for from the Oklahoma offense, a little bit more consistency in the control game, grind a team down. I think every team in the nation could work on that because, personally, I think that's a style of football that wins you games. But defensively, Brent Venables knows what he needs now. He was been able to work with the guys that, one, were already on roster, and two, work with the guys he got out the transfer portal last year on top of the guys he just got out the transfer portal this year. We saw that Clemson defense really start to form under Brent Venables in year two and really took off thereafter. Could we see the same thing for Oklahoma? It's going to be something we have to watch. What level of jump we see is what I'm interested in, because I have no doubt in my mind we will see a jump from the Oklahoma defense. We will see a jump from the Oklahoma Sooners. They will be an improved team. How much improvement? That's the interesting question. That is what I can't wait to see. And unfortunately, we're going to have to wait a little bit to see what a changed team Oklahoma is, because they have some games where they're just going to kick the teeth in of their opponents through the early portion of the schedule. And in a lot of ways, that's fantastic because you get some tune-up games. Personally, I still wish that Georgia game was on the schedule, but I think that's just because I'm a deep college football fan, and seeing OU play Georgia, come on. That's must-see TV. I want to see that anytime. But at the end of the day, Oklahoma having those tune-up games could be very powerful for Brent Venables. I think that you could make an argument that playing Georgia would be very powerful as well, even though Georgia is multiple years ahead of where Brent Venables is. We also need to understand this whenever people are saying, oh, but Brent Venables, they did this, that, and the other last year. Yeah, but he's 1 year in. This is year one. So it's kind of not a fair analysis to hold him to the expectations of a Kirby Smart who inherited a Ferrari that just needed a new steering wheel. Brent Venables inherited a Ferrari that had a Chevy Malibu engine in it, had no steering wheel, and was on cinder blocks. There's a lot of difference between these two situations, but the point being, playing Georgia gives you a really good look at this is what I need to work on, this is where I am. Gives you a really honest look in the mirror. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. Not playing Georgia, you get some tune-up games. You get to go into some games with confidence, build that confidence, and take that into the season. Playing Georgia, you might not have the confidence that the other games afford, but you get a really honest look at who you are. Maybe there's no wrong way to go about it. Maybe it's just a personal preference thing. But alas, I digress. I've kind of gone off on a tangent here. There are so many areas for this Oklahoma defense we can talk about being improved. I think one area that I am most interested in, because I've talked about it for so long, is that defensive front. What does the defensive front look like in year two with Brent Venables, with Todd Bates, and Miguel Chavez? By the way, Miguel Chavez has been such a fun, bright spot for Oklahoma. I highlighted him about 2 months after Brent Venables hired him, because he was just doing a phenomenal job on the trail. Now, there are going to be some more coaches we highlight very soon for OU that are doing a phenomenal job on the trail, but Miguel Chavez was absolutely one that we needed to talk about. We know what Todd Bates did at Clemson. We know the defensive lines he architected at Clemson. We know what Brent Venables did at Clemson. So now you're another year deeper. And the thing that really I'm interested in seeing, like I said, the defensive line, because when I talked to Jay of Unfair Sports, he was telling me the weight difference along the defensive line this year as compared to last year. It's palpable. The guys are bigger. And that was a big problem for OU. Whenever you're lining up and your defensive line is lined up opposite the offensive line, if your offensive lineman weighs 320 pounds, and that's not fat, he is a cut up 320 pounds, you can be a really athletic defensive lineman. But if you're 285 going up against someone who matches your athleticism but has 40 more pounds on you, that's going to be a really, really tough battle to win. And that's where we get into this conversation about Oklahoma needing the defensive line talent to help Brent Venables unlock the scheme, to help unlock the aggressive linebacker play. It all revolves around the defensive line. So having that size, that alone could be a benefit. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that's going to take the Oklahoma defensive line from being in the position they were last year to being the number one defensive line in the nation. Not my contention. But even having the ability to more successfully stand your ground, plug up holes, will allow more freedom for the linebackers. And that alone can be a benefit. That alone can be a massive benefit, plus the linebackers having a greater understanding of what their duties are. So for Oklahoma, biggest question, what level of improvement do we see from the defense, from the offense, from all parties involved? And once again, harkering back to the offense, I don't need the offense to make massive jumps for Oklahoma. They were a really good offense last year, and they ranked as a really good offense, even though Dylan Gabriel wasn't there for some games because of his injury, which is really impressive because the offensive stats would have looked even better had he been there. The only thing I need out of Oklahoma's offense is something I actually asked for going into the Nebraska game, because I picked up on the trend within 3 games last year for OU and started asking for it after game number 2. If you go back going into the Nebraska game, the one thing I asked for from Oklahoma's offense, control. I know you can score at will. You've showed me that. I don't doubt that. But can you grind this game down? Can you impart your will on the opponent when you need to? And if the answer is yes, I think that alone will help the Oklahoma defense this year. Because some improvements defensively for Oklahoma don't need to come from the defensive side of the football. In order to be the best football team you can be, you need a level of symbiosis. There must be a level of harmony, a yin and a yang per se. If the level of harmony is disrupted, you're asking more inevitably of one side of the ball or another. And in the case of OU last year, in a double-edged sword, the offense was able to score. They were able to generate points, but they did so through a feast or famine style. They were either scoring in 1 minute and 30 seconds or they were off the field in a 3 and out. That puts even more pressure on a defense that, one, doesn't have the bodies it truly needs to be the physical, hard-nosed defense they want to be. 2, they don't know the scheme quite yet because they're moving from the speed D to Brent Venables' defense, totally different schemes. And 3, you're putting them on the field for more plays, only increasing the chance and increasing the likelihood that the offense generates a big play on that defense, especially a defense that's suffering from point 1 and 2. You don't have the bodies you need to run the defense, and they don't know the defense well enough to be 100% confident without the bodies to run it. So the improvements from Oklahoma's defense, they don't only come from the defensive side of the football, though that's where the biggest improvements will come. Consistency in the control game for Oklahoma's offense will also afford them some ability to alleviate any pressure put on the defense. And actually, when we look at OU this year, I think the offense for the Oklahoma Sooners this year is predicated for them to be a run-first, grind-control team. You like the running backs you have. I really like the running backs you have. I think Javonte Barnes, very talented, and that's not even getting into what Gavin Sawchuk can do. But there's some questions at wide receiver, not talent. We're not questioning the talent of the wide receivers. We're just questioning who's going to step up. You have Farouk, you have Stoops. Other than that, 60% of the production and 62% of the yards is gone from that wide receiver room. That, by any definition, is a massive loss, right? That's a big loss. That is a significant exodus. The talent is there. You just need someone to step up. Talent isn't the question. Will it be Petaway? Will it be Andrell Anthony? Will it be LV Bunkley Shelton? Who knows? We just need to see. But one of the best ways that Oklahoma can help themselves, have your offense be a bit more predicated on control and less predicated on score now. It's great to have score now. Hell, I just asked more of that from Michigan, but you have to have that symbiosis. You have to have that yin and yang. And especially when your defense is still trying to improve, you as an offense need to do anything you can to help out your defense. And the one thing we talked about last year is looking at the time of control in Oklahoma games and how often it was slanted in the opponent's favor. When we take that into account, and if Oklahoma can fix that, they're going to be a really improved team this year. They're going to be a lot of fun. Now, Travis, thank you for joining in. Travis, thank you for participating in the chat. Happy you're in here. He says, what's your prediction for OU's record? Look, I think right now, I think at worst, you're a 9-win team because the schedule affords you a 9-win team. Now, I'm going to level with you. I think right now, if you made me pick, I'd pick Texas to win the Big 12. And before you get out your pitchforks, and deservedly so, I hear you. Boo, Ty, I get it. Pitchforks and all that's deserved. I'll take it. The reason why I do that, to give you some nuance here, is it's just that Steve Sarkisian and company are just a year ahead of Brent Venables and them, right? And it's not a knock on Brent Venables. It's just literally saying Sark got here a year earlier, so he is deeper into the changing of the guard at Texas than Brent Venables is at Oklahoma, just because he hasn't been afforded the same amount of time. And I also think it's just one of those situations where when we look at Texas, they have a talent makeup on this team of some guys that have been around, some guys that are very understanding of what they need. You have a 5-star quarterback. You have some very talented wide receivers. And Texas has just been at that position where it should come together this year, right? Like when we're talking about Texas this year, it should be a 10-win season for Texas. Whereas with Oklahoma, if they don't win the Big 12 this year, I'm going to be the first to come up here and say, yeah, they had to replace so much. Brent Venables is having to do so much. They're an improving team. It's moving in the right direction. Everything's going according to plan. Whereas if Texas doesn't win the Big 12 this year, we don't have that level of conversation, right? The level of conversation we have includes more worry, more questions about the future of the Longhorns, only because he's been there longer. He's been able to recruit longer. But for Oklahoma, I think your floor is a 9-win team. I think the season allows for it. You don't have Kansas State, which I think that's a good thing for Oklahoma. Kansas State, yes, they have to replace some pieces. You never sleep on disciplined teams, man. Look at Tulane and what they did to USC. You play a disciplined team, you cannot overlook them. You just can't. I mean, we've seen it time and time again. It's a trend. BYU, Travis, great example. BYU has knocked off how many dreams in college football? I mean, goodness gracious, that looked like a team for so many years where maybe they weren't going to be the best team in their conference, but they were due to knock off somebody. They were going to get an upset because they were so disciplined. And so I think Oklahoma will, one, be a much more disciplined football team. I think that's going to carry them a lot, because when I think of Brent Venables, that's actually one of the first things that comes to my mind is like this structure, this discipline, very intense in the best way possible. So Oklahoma is going to be an improved team. I don't think there's any questions around that. My question is how much? And I think there is a scenario, ladies and gentlemen, where we see Texas versus Oklahoma twice in 1 year. I'm just going to float that. I think there's a scenario where we could see that. The Big 12 is going to be fascinating this year. The Big 12 is going to be so much fun this year. I have not hid my excitement for the Big 12, and I've not hid my excitement for the moves that the Big 12 made trying to mitigate the loss of Texas and Oklahoma. I don't think they made up for the loss of Texas and Oklahoma, but come on, guys. We can't be college football fans and not be excited for UCF to get a Power 5 opportunity. That's awesome for the game of football, for UCF, certainly for the Big 12. You're talking about one of the biggest alumni bases and student body bases in the nation in UCF, in a fertile recruiting ground, and a team that's held their own. I love it. I love it. So, Travis, I know I got really off here, but OU, I think their floor is a 9-win team this year. I think that's the floor for Oklahoma because the schedule allows for it. Oklahoma has got a very favorable schedule. And I know some people don't like when people say that about their team. Oh, it's not in their control. They were supposed to play Georgia this year, and the SEC canceled that game. It wasn't Oklahoma who canceled that game. It wasn't Kirby who canceled that game. I guarantee you right now, if I had the ability to be sitting next to Brent Venables and Kirby Smart, those two men would be chomping at the bit to play that game. They would be trying to run through a brick wall to play that game. I have heard this before. I've seen Georgia fans say, oh, you canceled the game, and I've seen the vice versa. The truth is it was the SEC. Brent Venables and Kirby, they're not going to hide. That's not in their genetic makeup. That's not who they are. That's not those dudes. I'm going to let you know that right now. That's not who those cats are. If they had it their way, Georgia and OU would still play each other. I have no doubt about that. So unfortunate we don't get that game. But like I said, I think there's an argument to where it might be a good thing. Odd Future says, don't trust the refs. And look, some of those games, man, wild. They need to absolutely destroy teams, not even deal with them. No, Odd Future, and you know what's interesting? I usually don't talk a whole lot about refs because what are you going to do? You know what I mean? It's one of those situations, but you're not wrong. You're not wrong. Last year, there was a lot of questionable calls, not necessarily only against those two teams too. I mean, just Big 12 officiating as a whole. That was one that we're going to have to watch going forward. So interesting to see. So my next question for college football. All right, we talk about Oklahoma. Now let's talk about their rival, Texas. Is Texas back? Well, I think that's a fair question to ask. And like I said in a soliloquy I gave earlier, Texas is ahead of Oklahoma in terms of the coaching staff has just been there longer. They've had the ability to recruit to needs longer. It's not in terms of, hey, everything was equal and now one is here and the other is here. They didn't start on equal ground. They didn't start on an equal time frame. But because of that, Texas has had the opportunity to really build this team out well. They've recruited well. I know they always recruit well, but they've recruited with a lot of logic in mind, right? I mean, they've recruited enough to build a team. This is the year where it comes together. You have Quinn Ewers, who's not a new quarterback anymore. He's worked with Steve Sarkisian for a year. Now he understands the offense. And oh yeah, by the way, you have Malik Murphy and Arch Manning behind him. Both of those guys, per reports, per people I've talked to, really looking good in camp. And I'm not going to lie to you, the Texas people I talk to, they're not going to sugarcoat it to you. Because I've had some players for Texas I've been excited about, text them, and they're like, it's a year off. It's not this year. They really like their quarterback situation. They think that the guys behind Quinn are pushing Quinn. They think that they like what they have for the future. I'm not sitting here telling you they think Arch is ready to start day one. Not Mike. I'm just saying they've been really happy with the quarterback room. The offensive line room speaks for itself. Kelvin Banks is a future first rounder. DJ Campbell now coming up, offering another 5-star on that offensive line. So that's an area where they're going to be better. You miss Bijan. I don't think there's an offense alive that had Bijan Robinson, no longer has Bijan Robinson, and feels like they are going to just hit the ground running instantly in the rushing game. Now, that being said, Texas has recruited the running back position very, very well. I really like some of the running backs they have. Blue, I think Brooks is going to put college football on notice. Baxter was a fantastic addition, and Savion Red was so impressive. So impressive during their spring game. Really turned my head. But it has got to come together. At a certain point, it has got to come together. And what better year for this year? Because at least for Oklahoma fans in chat, you've watched your team win the Big 12 championship year and 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 time and time and time and time again. This is not a novel feeling for you. We also understand the collapse that happened at Oklahoma and how they're really trying to accelerate the rebuilding process and doing it quite well, if I might add, in terms of acquiring talent. Can't wait to see how the questions are answered this year, once again, because this year Brent has his guys in. He has a better understanding of the need. But this is Texas's last opportunity to win a Big 12 championship, because after this, you're on to the SEC. And I'm not saying that if you don't win a Big 12 championship, you will never win an SEC championship. So please don't think that's my contention here. That's where I'm going with this. It's not. But it is pride. It's pride. It's an ego thing. Let's be very honest here. The football players, the coaches, and us as fans, it's an ego thing. We're all competitive. And if I'm Texas and if I'm Sark, I want to end this conference by stepping on it and saying, thank you for being the last little step in the ladder. I'm using you to vault to the SEC. Goodbye. That's what I would do. That's what I would hope to do, at least. At least with Oklahoma, I mean, goodness gracious, you had so much of your team ripped away, you're rebuilding, and you've won the Big 12 so many times. So if you don't win it before you move to the SEC, it's like, okay, yeah. I mean, based on the extenuating circumstances we had, tough for us to instantly rebound and win it within 2 years, because that's the time frame. Texas, this is the year where people are going to be asking a lot of questions, which then, Travis, you asked my record prediction for OU, said, I think your floor is 9 games. I think if you're Texas, you have to be a 10-win team this year. You have to. You have got to. And I talked about this the other day. I love that Texas plays Alabama week 2. I love that for both Texas, and I love that for Alabama. Because whoever wins that game, their season just got even better. Whoever loses that game, their season is very much well still right in front of them. Because if Texas loses that game, but they run the Big 12 thereafter, they can still make the Big 12 championship and still have a run at the college football playoffs. If Alabama loses that game and wins out the SEC thereafter, they can still make the SEC championship and still have a run at the SEC in the college football playoffs. But what both of those teams get is a real honest look at who they are and where they can try and improve, understanding that your improvements during the season are going to be limited, right? Because you are who you are at that point. Now, you can grow. But if you don't have a defensive line that can hold their own, that's probably not going to change by the end of the season. You might have a defensive line that's performing better, that's a bit more efficient, but they're not going to go from University of North Texas, sorry, UNT, my alma mater, to Georgia in a few months. That's just not going to happen. It's just not. So for Texas, you got to be a 10-win team this year. I think you got to be. Odd Future says, no, that's Texas's kryptonite. We have pieces at the positions that matter. We just got to see it. It's all on Sark with the headsets. Odd, you said it great, man. I don't know that I could say it any better. I like Sark. I root for Sark. And I'm not going to lie to y'all. One of the big reasons I root for Sark so much is he very publicly dealt with demons in the public eye. One, it's difficult dealing with addiction. Two, doing it on public TV. That's tough. Now, look, I get it. He's a public figure. So it's different, right? Like he is, by extension, going to be in the public. So it is a higher likelihood that that downfall happens during the public. I'm certainly not trying to skirt any sort of personal accountability here. My point is, I have a lot of respect for people who go through things like that and then do what they can to turn it around and get another opportunity and try and make the most of it. I got a lot of love for that. I got a lot of respect for that. And so I do root for Steve Sarkisian. In a perfect world, he would have a great season this year. He would have that 10 wins and they would move on. I don't wish for any coach to not do well in college football. College football is better when there's more good teams. And I really do root for Steve Sarkisian. But Odd, you hit the nail on the head. The biggest problem thus far has been the lack of adjustments for Steve Sarkisian. In fact, I don't have it in front of me, and I will for Friday. I will for Friday because we're about to wind down. And Anthony, I'm going to hit your comment before we get out here. So after this point, there is a fascinating point breakdown of Texas where we look at how many points they score in the first and second quarter relative to how much drop off we experience in the third quarter, but specifically the fourth quarter, where they're actually in the negative in the fourth quarter, allowing teams to score more than them, which is incredible when you look at the disparity that we see in quarter 1 and 2. That's a fascinating conversation. Actually, Odd, I think you've just kind of inspired me. I think I might get Homer on here. I think Homer and I might do a stream where we just try and break down why. We might not come to an answer, but it'd be a lot of fun. Anthony says, Ty, what are your thoughts on my... Yeah, I'm sorry, Anthony. That Michigan had last year, and that's why we weren't as successful to focus so much on running the game. Yeah, no, look, I agree. That's what I mean, Anthony, in terms of like Michigan, a phenomenal team. But if you can mitigate their rushing attack, then you're asking McCarthy to beat you with his arm. And I like McCarthy, but I think you feel much more comfortable if you're playing a game of chance against the Michigan offense. What do you want to have beat you? Are you going to choose the Michigan rushing attack or the Michigan passing attack? I think everybody's going to say, hey, let's take the Michigan rushing attack down and roll the dice on the passing attack. Completely agree. 100%. And I think the biggest area where I can point you to all of this is look at that TCU game. TCU walked into that Michigan game and said, okay, if we can stop them running the football, we have a chance. TCU, if they did that to Georgia, Georgia would just say, okay, you want to bring your safeties in the box? We're just going to hit you right over the top again and again and again and again, because they had too much balance. Bring your safeties down. Please, for the love of God, bring your safeties in the box. Please do it. Run that 3-3-5, stack the box, and let's get active. It's on go mode. I mean, look, it is what it is. We've seen it all the time. Another great example of this, in terms of just like you're one-dimensional, you have something you're great at, is you just think of the teams, Anthony, that are one-dimensional, all offense, no defense. Right? Sorry, Oklahoma fans, but you look back to some of those Lincoln Riley Oklahoma teams. Offense, otherworldly. You couldn't ask for much more offensively. But the defense wasn't there. It's one of the reasons why on Monday I was talking about USC. I said I wouldn't be shocked to see USC in the college football playoffs, but I don't think they're going to win a national championship, because until I'm proven otherwise, I don't think you can be a one-dimensional team and win a national championship. I just don't. I don't think you have to be the number one offense or the number one defense in the nation to win a national championship. I think you have to be a damn good football team. And I think you have to be a damn good football team in every single facet of the game. That's just how I view it. I don't think you can be all or nothing, feast or famine, because I just don't think the worst defense we've seen in the modern era win a national championship was ranked number 58 in the nation. And that was the Tim Tebow Auburn defense. Oh, Tim Tebow Auburn. Jesus, I'm sitting here thinking about Swamp Kings. The Cam Newton Auburn defense was ranked like 58th in the nation. They won a national championship, but they also had Cam Newton. And that was one of the single greatest seasons I've ever seen. Ever. What he did to Alabama, legendary. Genuinely. Put it in the archives of college football. Put that game in the pantheon of college football. As tough as it is for me to admit, what he did that game was legendary. I said Tim Tebow after watching Swamp Kings last night. By the way, would absolutely check that out. Let's see. So I think the one thing that needs to happen with Texas is maybe Steve might need to start relinquishing some control of offense to his OC. We'll see after this year, Anthony. It's tough for me to say that. It's tough for me to say that whenever you're so gifted. But look, if it continues, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. At a certain point, you do have to relinquish some control. So I don't disagree entirely. I don't. PG, thank you for hopping in here. Everybody, y'all, if y'all don't already check out the PG show, I don't know what you're doing. He's on here all the time. You can catch him on our evening live streams. We'll be going live Friday evening, Monday. A little bit up in the air right now because I do so many live streams in the evening. And unfortunately, I do have a wife now that would like some time with me. So I have to split my time. But Friday evening, we will be coming back. We'll be having that live stream. That'll be a lot of fun. Odd Future says Texas defensive stats were inflated due to the offensive stalling out in the second half of the games, going 3 and out too much and too fast. Where's that? 100% Odd Future. And this is what I talked about earlier. I think you may have been in here when I was talking about Oklahoma's improvements this year. They're not only going to be from the defensive side. What I mean when I say that is Oklahoma's defense isn't going to be the only thing to help Oklahoma's defense. Oklahoma's offense also can help Oklahoma's defense by being a more consistent offense. That offense Oklahoma had last year, that wasn't the problem. They were a good offense, but they need to be consistent. They need to be able to control the ball because, as you point out, and as I pointed out before we got down this rabbit hole, if you are Brent Venables and you already have to redo a complete scheme, you don't have the players you need to redo the scheme, and your offense is a feast or famine type offense where I'm scoring in 2 minutes or I'm giving you the ball back in 30 seconds, your defense is going to be on the field a disproportionate amount of time. And for Oklahoma, when we looked at the time of control, the time of possession, their defense was on the field a disproportionate amount of times. It's tough to be an improving defense when you're gassed, man. Like you don't have the depth. You don't have the bodies you need. You're not acclimated to the scheme, and your offense, through no fault of their own. I'm not blaming Jeff Lebby here, but it is a point that, let's be honest, it's a fact. It is. Through no fault of Jeff Lebby, your offense is a feast or famine offense, and the reason why I have faith is I do believe Oklahoma has that depth. I do believe Jeff Lebby has that card because at Ole Miss, how active he got with the running back. So I do believe they have that card to pull out and say, okay, we can speed it up. We can slow it down. Do you have an off-speed pitch? You got a fastball. Do you have an off-speed pitch? And if you get that, well, now you're a real dangerous pitcher. Real dangerous pitcher. If this scenario were to happen, who gets into the college football playoffs? Baylor, 3 losses, Big 12 championship, or 11-1. Ooh. How many losses does Clemson have, Anthony? That's a good question. That's a really good question. I give credence. I think I give, this is a good question, Anthony. I need more info. We're already going over, but you've piqued my interest with this one. I need more info. 1, Clemson would be undefeated. Beautiful. So let me write this down. So you got Clemson undefeated, and who does Baylor play in the Big 12, and what would their record be in this scenario? By the way, guys, I love scenarios like this. So if you ever have one, let's talk. This is what being fans is about. This is what's fun. So we got Baylor, champ, 3 loss. Miami, runner up. And so you're saying Miami, you're in this scenario, Anthony, are you saying that Miami's only loss comes from the ACC championship, or after the ACC championship, that would be loss 2? If they both have the same record, then the ACC. I think that you would have a better chance of getting the ACC teams in just because they would have less losses. Yes, you wouldn't be a conference championship, but at the point, I mean, you'd have to think of this. A 3-loss Baylor team and a 3-loss TCU team, at the end of that game, I mean, your TCU team would be a 4-loss team. Baylor would win. You still have 3 losses as compared to an undefeated Clemson. I mean, they're definitely getting in. And a 1-loss Miami, assuming that loss comes to Clemson in this scenario, Miami would get it. I think so. Yeah. Because until we get the automatic bid for conference championship, I have to look at this the way that the playoff committee has typically looked at it. And I don't know that a 3-loss team gets into the college football playoffs. I just don't. Not now. I just don't. I think that's way too many losses. I just do. Especially in a 4-team. I think the blowback you would receive would be wild. It'd be fun. That's a super interesting scenario, though. Love that. Love that. But we're going to go ahead and get out of here. Guys, thank you for tuning in. Once again, I started this off by saying it. If you love college football apparel and you love vintage logos, you need to go check out Home Field. You see the banner in front of me. We got the sticker on the computer. They're working with the channel. Awesome company. I highly recommend you check them out. And what's more, if you go check out Home Field, find something you like, and they have your favorite college, go over there, check it out. Use code ATTS15 at checkout to get 15% off your order. Helps the channel, helps you. Everybody wins. We'll be back on Friday talking about some more questions for college football, some more people. It is what it is. Ton of fun, guys. College football is back. Wouldn't be any other way, man. Can't wait for the games to be here. Can't wait for Friday. Until next time, we'll see you.